The hum of the fluorescent lights was the only sound that dared to break the silence. A pale glow flooded the waiting hall, where rows upon rows of weary faces stood in perfect order. Each body pressed forward in slow increments, their eyes glazed, their expressions emptied of hope. No one spoke. No one questioned. The line stretched further than the eye could follow, curving into a horizon of human figures that dissolved into the distance. At the very back of it stood a man, a newcomer. His suit was wrinkled, his hair slightly damp from the rain outside, and the confusion in his eyes burned brighter than any overhead light. Unlike the others, his gaze darted between the tiled floor and the towering door at the front of the hall. The door was massive, gray, and windowless, with a rusted plaque that read only one word: Clerk. He cleared his throat, a small, nervous sound. No one turned. His instinct was to ask, "What is this place? How long have we been here?" But something in the stillness told him that speaking aloud would make him stand out, and standing out felt dangerous. Minutes crawled by. Hours, maybe. Time here felt slippery. The newcomer shifted his weight impatiently, scanning the hall, and that was when it happened. A woman near the front, frail, with sunken eyes and a shawl pulled tight around her shoulders, staggered. Her knees buckled, and she crumpled onto the floor. The sound of her body hitting the tiles echoed through the vast space like a dropped book in a cathedral. The newcomer gasped, instinct pushing him forward. But what froze him in place wasn't the fall, it was the reaction. Or rather, the lack of one. No one screamed. No one rushed to help her. The man behind her simply stepped forward, closing the gap in the line as if she had never been there. The others did the same, shifting their feet, moving closer, ignoring the crumpled body on the floor. Their faces remained blank. The newcomer's heart pounded. He crouched down, whispering sharply, "She's hurt. Somebody." A hand touched his shoulder. He turned to see an older man with tired, glassy eyes shaking his head slowly. "Don't," the old man muttered, his voice like sandpaper. "Just wait." The newcomer recoiled. Wait? She just collapsed. But the elder's face betrayed no outrage, no fear. Only resignation. He gave a weary glance toward the massive door. "The clerk sees everything. Step out of line, and you'll never step back in." The words chilled him deeper than the fluorescent light ever could. He looked back at the woman. She wasn't moving anymore. Two silent figures in gray uniforms appeared as if from nowhere, lifting her body with mechanical precision and carrying her toward a side corridor. Her shawl slipped from her shoulder, and then she was gone. The gap in the line closed once more. The newcomer's fists tightened. "You can't all just stand here like this. Someone has to say something." His voice cracked, echoing across the chamber. Still, not a single head turned. The crowd stood like statues, obedient to an order no one had spoken. He could feel it now, a presence pressing in from the front of the hall. That door. That silent, immovable door. Whoever or whatever sat behind it held the power to command hundreds of people into silence, to strip them of their instinct to care, to force them into blind obedience. The faceless clerk was the villain here, the unseen force that made people ignore their own humanity. The newcomer stared at the door, his jaw set, his breath uneven. In that moment, he knew one thing. If he didn't resist, he too would become like the rest. A hollow figure, waiting forever, forgetting why he came in the first place. He swallowed hard, forcing his voice into a whisper. "I won't become one of you." And then, breaking the long monotony, a sound shivered through the hall. Metal groaned. Hinges strained. The massive gray door at the front began to move. The silence deepened as every head turned in unison. The newcomer's pulse raced, eyes fixed on the widening gap, waiting to finally see the clerk. But when the door finally creaked open, what stepped out wasn't a clerk at all. It was something else. The thing that stepped out of the door was not the clerk. It was not even human. Its limbs were long and thin, folding strangely as it moved. Its head was shrouded in a hood, its face obscured. In its hand it held a clipboard stacked with papers that looked damp, their edges curling like leaves left too long in the rain. It scanned the line without speaking, its hidden eyes resting on each person for only a moment before moving on. Then it turned back inside, and the heavy door slammed shut again. The line did not stir. The newcomer's breathing was ragged now, but the elder beside him remained unmoved, his arms crossed, his posture unbroken. "What was that?" the newcomer hissed. The elder's lips barely moved. "Not for us to know. Not for us to ask. Just wait." Wait for what? His voice cracked with frustration. For hours? For days? The old man tilted his head, his eyes glazed with something between memory and emptiness. "I've been waiting since I can remember. The clerk will call when it's my turn." The words were too calm, too practiced, as though he had repeated them to himself so many times they no longer held meaning. The newcomer's stomach tightened. Since he can remember. How long had this man stood here? How long had any of them? He tried again, scanning the faces near him. That was when he noticed a woman a few steps ahead. She clutched a small child against her chest, her knuckles white from gripping the boy's shirt. The child's eyes were wide, blank, unblinking. His lips did not part. He hadn't made a sound since the newcomer had arrived. The woman's eyes darted constantly, scanning left and right, as though enemies lurked between the bodies. She rocked the boy back and forth, whispering a mantra under her breath. The newcomer leaned forward cautiously. "How long have you been here?" She snapped her head toward him, her face hollow but sharp. "Don't talk," she hissed. "The enforcers are listening." "Enforcers?" Her lips trembled, but she didn't answer. Instead, her gaze shifted behind him, and her shoulders stiffened. The newcomer turned slightly. Two men stood a few places back, their posture rigid, their eyes unblinking. They weren't dressed differently from the others, but something about them was wrong. Their faces bore no trace of life, no fear, no hunger, no doubt. They were mannequins carved from flesh, watching silently. The elder muttered from beside him, "Some of us choose to enforce the rules. Remind the rest of us why we must stay in line." The newcomer's skin crawled. "They're just people. They can't stop us." The elder's eyes hardened. "They can, and they will." The woman with the child rocked faster, her whispers turning frantic. "Stay quiet. Stay small. Don't give them reason." The child stirred at last, not with a cry, not even a murmur. He simply lifted his hand and pointed forward at the door. His finger didn't shake. His eyes did not blink. The gesture felt unnatural, like a puppet string had been tugged. The newcomer shuddered. He wanted to shout, to demand answers, but every instinct screamed that doing so would summon something he wasn't ready to face. The hours bled together. The sterile hall smelled faintly of bleach, but beneath it lingered something fouler. The sour bite of mold, the metallic tang of rust, as though the building itself was decaying under the fluorescent glow. The air was dry, yet when he brushed his hand against the wall, it came away damp. His throat burned. His legs ached. The silence gnawed at him until even his own heartbeat felt like a rebellion. He tried again to whisper to the elder. "Why don't you leave? Why don't any of you just walk away?" The elder's jaw tightened. "Step out of line and you vanish. No one remembers you. No one even says your name. It is as if you never existed." The newcomer scoffed, but his voice betrayed the fear crawling up his spine. "That's impossible." The elder didn't argue. He simply stared forward, empty and certain, as though truth was etched into his bones. The newcomer turned to the mother. "Have you seen it happen?" Her eyes flashed, wide and desperate. She pressed her child tighter. Don't even think it. That's how they find you." Her words were barely above a breath, but the newcomer felt them like a scream. The silence pressed down heavier than before. He swallowed, his throat dry, his chest tight. The rules here were unspoken, yet carved into every face. Don't speak. Don't stray. Don't resist. And yet, the more he tried to follow them, the more unbearable the waiting became. The seconds dragged, and with each tick of the buzzing light above him, his defiance grew. Then it happened. The fluorescent bulbs trembled, buzzing louder. The glow sputtered and snapped, plunging the hall into darkness. For a heartbeat, the silence broke. A gasp, a shuffle of feet. Then, when the lights blazed back on, the newcomer froze. Half the line was gone. And just when he thought the waiting was unbearable, the lights flickered, and half the line was gone. The empty spaces were impossible to ignore. Moments ago, hundreds of people had stood shoulder to shoulder in the endless line, their blank eyes fixed on the door. Now, in the blink of a flicker, entire rows were gone. Vanished. The newcomer's breath came in ragged bursts. He turned in circles, scanning the hall, desperate for explanation. Where are they? Where did they go? The elder beside him kept staring forward, his expression unchanged. Processed. The word hung in the air like a sentence. The newcomer shook his head. Processed? What does that even mean? But the crowd didn't answer. No one screamed, no one ran. No one demanded clarity. Instead, they muttered the word under their breath like a prayer. Process, processed, processed. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, their glow casting long shadows that bent strangely across the tiled floor. The newcomer pressed his palms against his temples. This isn't real. This is some kind of trick. Yet the evidence was right before him. Gaps in the line where bodies had once been, spaces now filled only by silence. He moved toward the woman with the child. You saw that. You saw them disappear. She clutched the boy tighter, her arms trembling. Don't speak of it. Don't even look at it. The clerk decides. The line obeys. Her words set his nerves on fire. No. This isn't obedience. This is madness. We can't just stand here like sheep while people vanish into thin air. The elder finally turned his head, his voice a grave murmur. Fight the line, and the line will fight you. It was then that the newcomer noticed something different. The walls, once sterile, blank, endless, now bore markings. At first, they seemed like scratches, the kind left by someone's fingernails against stone. But as he stared, his heart quickened. They weren't random. They were tallies. Dozens. Hundreds. Thousands of them, etched into the walls with a precision that suggested purpose. Each mark represented someone who had once stood here. Someone who had vanished. Someone processed. The newcomer staggered backward. How long has this been going on? The elder closed his eyes. Longer than you want to know. The fluorescent lights flickered again, only briefly, but enough to make the entire line stiffen. This time no one disappeared. But the message was clear. The line itself, this monstrous system, could punish whenever it pleased. He felt the walls closing in, the rules tightening around his throat. He could no longer separate the people from the machine. The line wasn't just a cue. It was alive. It was the villain, the instrument of the clerk's faceless will. And yet, the silence infuriated him more than the fear. Listen to me, he shouted, his voice ricocheting through the hall. Heads turned at last, hundreds of blank faces meeting his eyes. Don't you see what's happening? We're being erased, one by one. You think waiting will save you, but waiting is the weapon. It's killing us slowly, and you're letting it happen. For a moment, the silence broke. A ripple of murmurs ran down the child's words echoed through the hall, but no one repeated them. No one dared. A heavy silence crashed down like iron bars, suffocating and absolute. The newcomer's heart pounded, each beat a drum of defiance against the oppressive quiet. He felt something shift inside him, a line he could no longer toe, a rule he could no longer follow. He pushed forward. At first, only a step. The floor beneath him seemed to hum in protest. The people on either side flinched, but no one stopped him. He took another, then another, until his pace quickened into a determined stride. Gasps rippled down the hall. Some whispered warnings, others turned their eyes away. The enforcers stepped forward, their faces blank masks of authority, but the newcomer shoved past them. They reached for him, yet their hands passed through his arms like smoke, as though the line itself granted him passage. The door loomed larger with every step, the massive, windowless slab marked with its single word, Clerk. It radiated a coldness, as though it had never known the warmth of sunlight. He slammed his fists against it, his voice breaking the long silence. Open. The hall trembled. Hinges groaned. And then, for the first time since his arrival, the door yielded. A chill wind spilled from the darkness beyond, carrying the scent of ink, mildew, and something metallic, like dried blood. The newcomer stepped inside. The chamber was vast, stretching endlessly in every direction, filled with towering filing cabinets that swayed as though they were alive. Their drawers rattled, shrieking like wounded animals. Clocks hung crooked on the walls, their hands spinning backward, ticking in unison with a rhythm that defied sanity. At the center sat the clerk. The stamp rose high into the air, dripping with black ink. "No!" he screamed, thrashing, clawing at the hand around his throat. But his strength faltered. He felt his memories slipping already, the smell of rain, the color of his mother's scarf, the sound of his own laughter. Details dissolved, turning gray and brittle. The filing cabinets began to howl. Their drawers opened and slammed shut violently, as though cheering for his erasure. The clocks spun faster, their hands blurring, their ticking growing louder, drowning out his cries. "I am not yours," he shouted, desperate, wild. "I am not a number. I am not a paper." The clerk pressed harder, forcing the sheet against his chest until the ink bled into his skin. His vision blurred. His body weakened. He could feel his identity unraveling, thread by thread. His knees buckled. His hands fell limp. For a moment, he was sure this was the end. He would vanish like the rest, swallowed whole by the machine. But then, in the far distance, he heard it. A sound that did not belong to the clerk. A murmur. A whisper. A rising tide of voices. The line. The people he had left behind were stirring. Their silence fractured. Their obedience cracked. For the first time, hundreds of voices rose together, confused, angry, alive. The clerk froze. Its grip tightened, then faltered. The stamp trembled in its hand. The newcomer gasped, pulling one last breath into his collapsing lungs. His eyes widened with a spark of impossible hope. And just when he thought he was erased forever, the line itself rebelled. At the center sat the clerk.
Behind. The newcomer pressed harder. "We don't have to accept this. If we move together, they can't stop us. If we shout together, they can't silence us." The murmurs grew, louder now, the fragile sound of awakening. But then came the retaliation. The lights buzzed, pulsed, and flared white-hot. Pain seared his eyes as the entire hall flooded with brilliance. People screamed, not in rebellion, but in agony, clutching their heads, their knees buckling. The air itself felt like it was burning. And just as quickly, the lights dimmed back to their dull hum. The line straightened. The murmurs stopped. Their faces reset to blank obedience. The newcomer staggered, shaking, his throat raw. He looked to the elder. "You saw it. It punished us for even thinking of rebellion." The elder's voice was heavy with resignation. "The line doesn't forgive. It remembers." Still, not everyone had reset fully. A few nearby leaned closer, whispering in his direction. Their eyes darted nervously, but there was a glimmer of recognition, of shared truth. One man murmured, "I heard about this online. People talk about it in the forums. They say this place is real, hidden beneath the surface. Some believe it's purgatory. Others, a government project." Another woman whispered, "I saw a thread once, people describing this exact hall. The door. The lights. The vanishing. They said if you read too long, you might end up here." The newcomer's blood ran cold. The nightmare wasn't contained to this hall, it lived in stories, in whispers, in hidden corners of the world. It was bigger than any one of them. The enforcers shifted suddenly, their eyes flicking to the whisperers. The man who had spoken ducked his head quickly, shrinking back into silence. The newcomer's fists clenched. The rules were everywhere, invisible yet unbreakable. Speak too loud, and the lights would punish. Step out of line, and you would vanish. Resist, and you would be processed. But it was not human. It had never been human. Its face was smooth, eyeless, a pale oval of featureless skin. Its body was wrapped in grey fabric, tight and suffocating, its arms impossibly long. One hand clutched a massive stamp, the other shuffled endless stacks of damp paper. Each stamp landed with a crack that shook the chamber, and with every impact, the newcomer swore he could feel lives being erased, identities snuffed out like candles in a storm. Stamp. Another face vanished from his memory. Stamp. Another name dissolved on his tongue. Stamp. The woman with the shawl who had collapsed, what was her name? Had she ever had one? The newcomer staggered. Stop. You're erasing them. You're erasing us. The clerk did not look at him, it could not. It had no eyes, no mouth, no ears. But somehow it heard him. Somehow it mocked him with its silence. The newcomer rushed forward, slamming his hands against the desk. I won't let you do this. The clerk's stamping hand froze. Slowly, its eyeless face tilted toward him. Then, with grotesque speed, its arm shot out, stretching across the desk, its fingers wrapping around his throat. The touch was ice, burning and numbing at once. The clerk pulled him closer, pressing a sheet of damp paper against his chest. He looked down. The paper bore his name. His handwriting. His memories. His self. It was not human. It had never been human. Its face was smooth, eyeless, a pale oval of featureless skin. Its body was wrapped in grey fabric, tight and suffocating, its arms impossibly long. One hand clutched a massive stamp, the other shuffled endless stacks of damp paper. Each stamp landed with a crack that shook the chamber, and with every impact, the newcomer swore he could feel lives being erased, identities snuffed out like candles in a storm. Stamp. Another face vanished from his memory. Stamp. Another name dissolved on his tongue. Stamp. The woman with the shawl who had collapsed, what was her name? Had she ever had one? The newcomer staggered. Stop. You're erasing them. You're erasing us. The clerk did not look at him, it could not. It had no eyes, no mouth, no ears. But somehow it heard him. Somehow it mocked him with its silence. The newcomer rushed forward, slamming his hands against the desk. I won't let you do this. The clerk's stamping hand froze. Slowly, its eyeless face tilted toward him. Then, with grotesque speed, its arm shot out, stretching across the desk, its fingers wrapping around his throat. The touch was ice, burning and numbing at once. The clerk pulled him closer, pressing a sheet of damp paper against his chest. He looked down. The paper bore his name. His handwriting. His memories. His self. It was not human. It had never been human. Its face was smooth, eyeless, a pale oval of featureless skin. Its body was wrapped in grey fabric, tight and suffocating, its arms impossibly long. One hand clutched a massive stamp, the other shuffled endless stacks of damp paper. Each stamp landed with a crack that shook the chamber, and with every impact, the newcomer swore he could feel lives being erased, identities snuffed out like candles in a storm. Stamp. Another face vanished from his memory. Stamp. Another name dissolved on his tongue. Stamp. The woman with the shawl who had collapsed, what was her name? Had she ever had one? The newcomer staggered. Stop. You're erasing them. You're erasing us. The clerk did not look at him, it could not. It had no eyes, no mouth, no ears. But somehow it heard him. Somehow it mocked him with its silence. The newcomer rushed forward, slamming his hands against the desk. I won't let you do this. The clerk's stamping hand froze. Slowly, its eyeless face tilted toward him. Then, with grotesque speed, its arm shot out, stretching across the desk, its fingers wrapping around his throat. The touch was ice, burning and numbing at once. The clerk pulled him closer, pressing a sheet of damp paper against his chest. He looked down. The paper bore his name. His handwriting. His memories. His self.